All right, everyone. So I want to talk to you guys about something that has been on my mind recently, and that is the execution of Frank Atwood. Frank Atwood was a murderer and a child rapist. He was a pedophile. He was attracted to children. He was a sadist, and he was a manipulator. And the only reason why I ever heard of this guy is because I noticed some Eastern Orthodox Christians online mourning this guy's death. A number of days ago, the government of Arizona executed Frank Atwood for the murder of an 8-year-old girl by the name of Vicky Hoskinson. Atwood kidnapped Hoskinson and murdered her. He was a sadist who had an attraction for children, and he wanted to kidnap and rape a child. Why in the hell would Eastern Orthodox Christians, why in the hell would any Christian defend a pedophile and a murderer? There are Eastern Orthodox Christians online calling Frank Atwood a martyr, giving him the title of Father. Yes, Father, as if he was a priest, calling him Father Ephraim. Yes, Father Ephraim. Saying that he was a martyr. A martyr for what? He wasn't killed for the cause of Christianity. He was executed because he murdered a little girl. But yet you have Christians defending this monster. And I find it so disturbing whenever Christians defend predators, sadists, rapists, murderers, pedophiles, molesters, and they cover up their defense with Jesus. They hide behind the name of Jesus in their defense of these criminals, of these monsters. So I really wanted to get to the bottom of this case. There are many people online talking about this case as if they have read all of the documentation, as if they have done any serious research, saying, oh, this was an unjust execution. This was the execution of an innocent man. And I even heard read a comment by some Eastern Orthodox guy saying, oh, yeah, Atwood was probably executed by some Freemason, and the jury probably all consisted of Protestants, and yada, yada, yada. And here I am thinking, wait a second. Actually, look at the case. Look at the evidence. So that's what I'm here to do. This is going to be a lengthy video. I spent a number of hours reading through a couple of court documents, and I sifted through much of the information, and I took excerpts from a couple of court documents, and these excerpts are the ones that truly reveal that Atwood deserved capital punishment. And I don't want to get into complicated details or anything like that. I want to make this straight to the point and easy to understand. So here we go. First off, I want to say that almost all of the statements that will be presented in this video are from the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. Specifically, this is a document entitled Atwood versus Ryan, and it was filed on September of 2017. So first off, let's establish that Atwood was a pedophile. And the reason why I want to first establish this is because why in the hell would any Christian defend and mourn the death of a pedophile? Someone who preys on children, someone who takes sadistic pleasure in sexually torturing a child. Why in the hell would any Christian go out of his or her way to do that? I find this so sickening. So let me first establish that this guy was a pedophile. So these are excerpts from this particular court document from the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. And it says, before the kidnapping and murder convictions at issue in this case, Frank Jarvis Atwood had been convicted twice for sexual incidents involving children. In 1975, Atwood was convicted of engaging in lewd and lascivious conduct with a child under the age of 14 years in violation of Section 288 of the California Penal Code, and incarcerated at Atascadero State Hospital, a maximum security facility for convicts deemed to be mentally ill, until his discharge in 1978. Now, he was sentenced to 5 years in this maximum security facility. And he only served 3 of those years because he was let out on parole. And what did he do after he was released from this facility? He went to Arizona. And he preyed upon young Vicky. And Vicky was kidnapped and murdered. Going on, in 1981, Atwood was convicted for kidnapping an 8-year-old boy, and this is why he ended up in the Atascadero State Hospital. So in 1981, Atwood was convicted for kidnapping an 8-year-old boy. Atwood encountered the boy while riding his motorcycle and offered the boy a ride. When the boy refused, Atwood threw the boy's bicycle down and pulled him onto the motorcycle. After kidnapping the victim, Atwood forced him to perform oral sex, holding his head down so roughly that the boy received visible scratches on his neck. And yes, this is one of the most disturbing stories that I've ever researched, and you can see why. And threatening to kill the boy if he screamed. Atwood was incarcerated in a California state penitentiary for his offense. This is the guy that a good number of Eastern Orthodox Christians online are defending. This crime right here, this crime that took place in 1981, this right here is worthy of capital punishment. Right here. So why are we defending this guy? Why are we defending this monster? He should have been put under capital punishment a long time ago. Among other items in the records, a report included Atwood's statement that a 4-year-old girl that he molested deserved it because she was the block tattletale. Atwood also stated that he molested the 10-year-old girl because he felt like scaring someone. So this guy had multiple victims. He was a serial molester. While in prison, Atwood communicated with Ernest Bernstein, a member of a religious cult, about his sexual interest in young children. In one of his letters to Bernstein, Atwood disclosed that he had been molested when he was 14 by a 24-year-old man, but stated that he honestly really enjoyed it. Atwood asserted in the letter that he saw no reason that sex between him and pre-adolescent kids is not only not allowed, but also illegal, and admitted that when he was 15, he and a friend had taken a 4-year-old girl into some bushes to explain the birds and the bees to his young friend, as well as satisfying Atwood's sexual curiosity. Atwood was released on parole in May 1984. Bernstein testified that during a phone call after Atwood's release, Atwood stated that he was considering, quote, going out and picking up a child, and that this time he would make sure the child wouldn't talk. So he was sentenced to 5 years in prison for molesting a child. 5 years in this maximum security facility in California for molesting a child, and then he was released after serving 3 of those years. This is America, I know. Apparently, molesting children is not a big deal in American society, because if it was a big deal, we would not be sentencing these monsters to just 5 years and then releasing them after 3 years for, good behavior or whatever, on parole. So he was released after serving just 3 of the 5 years. And then after he was released, he called up his friend, Ernest Bernstein, and he said, I am going to go find a child, and this time, this child will not talk. And the reason why he said that was because his last victims reported him to the authorities. They identified him to the authorities, and so that's why he ended up in prison. So this time he said this child won't talk, meaning he was going to not only rape a child, he was going to murder the child. Again, this is the monster that these Eastern Orthodox Christians are calling Father Ephraim. It's so sickening. It's so sickening. And I even found a video recently from a Greek Orthodox YouTube channel, I believe. It was all in Greek. And it was this video with this bleeding heart music in the background talking about how this guy was a martyr. And I was shocked to see that this video had over 200,000 views. I believe the number was over 260-something thousand views. And all the comments were in Greek, and I used Google Translate, and they were saying, oh, this poor man, I can't believe this happened, blah, 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 blah. And they're being deceived, these people. They think, oh, goodness, look at what the American government is doing, killing this poor monk. Oh, my goodness. No, this guy was a child rapist. He was absolutely deserving of capital punishment under the state. So Atwood also had a violent past. I mean, obviously, what he did to these children was violent, but he also committed other forms of violence. According to the court record, the records documented Atwood's aggressive pre-incarceration behavior, describing an incident in which Atwood threatened his mother with a butcher knife and generally terrorized the family, and another incident in which Atwood threatened his cousin with a knife. So this guy was a monster. It's quite obvious. Let's look at the evidence. So according to the court record, Atwood's initial counsel, Lamar Cowser, hired two experts, Dr. Philip Keene, the Yavapai County medical examiner, and Dr. Hal Chilton, a forensic odontologist, to inspect the remains. Keene and Chilton agreed that the remains were Vicky's. So Vicky was kidnapped. She went missing. Her mother was looking for her. Her sister was looking for her. Mother calls the police, and they do an investigation. And they looked at the vehicle of Atwood, and they found pink paint, remnants of pink paint on his vehicle's bumper, and that pink paint matched with the pink paint on Vicky's bicycle. This little girl asked her mother if she could leave the house so that she could deliver a letter to her pen pal. And the mother said, yes, go ahead. And the child gets on her bicycle and never comes back. And it's hard for me to fathom this, because I'm just imagining the pain that this mother went through and is still going through because of this. So they went out, she sent her other daughter to go look for her, and they couldn't find her. And eventually they found the bicycle, and the police did an investigation. They found remnants of the pink paint of her bike on this monster's car. And They arrested him, but they couldn't get him on murder. They could only get him on kidnapping charges. And the reason why they couldn't get him on murder charges was quite obvious. It's because they couldn't find the body. No proof of murder. But about 7 months after her disappearance, Vicky's disappearance, somebody found a small human skull in the desert of Arizona, called the police, and they figured out that this was the skull of Vicky Hoskinson. And Atwood's lawyer, Lamar Cowser, was the one who hired the two experts, Dr. Philip Keene, who was the Yavapai County medical examiner, and Dr. Hal Chilton, a forensic odontologist. And they inspected the skeletal remains, and they concluded that it was Vicky's bones. So the experts, not that the state hired, but the experts that Atwood's counsel, Atwood's attorney hired, concluded that these were the skeletal remains of Vicky. FBI agent Declan Hoffman later testified that as a part of the inspection, he photographed Atwood's car from numerous angles. This set of photos is referred to as the Kerrville Suite, or Soup. At least one photo included in the Kerrville Suite shows a streak of pink paint on the front bumper of Atwood's Datsun. The same day, the FBI agents transported Atwood's car to an FBI facility in San Antonio and obtained a search warrant to conduct a more thorough search of the car. On September 22, 1984, the FBI agents executed the search warrants and observed pink paint on the front bumper of Atwood's car during this search. FBI agent Edward Berwitz took scrapings of this pink paint from the front bumper, and FBI agent Hoffman took additional photos. According to the state's witnesses at trial, laboratory tests established that the pink paint on the front bumper of Atwood's car had come from the victim's bike or from another source exactly like the bike, and that Vicky's bicycle had nickel particles on it that were consistent with nickel on Atwood's bumper. The state's accident reconstruction expert Paul Larmour testified that he found a nearly perfect match height-wise between the contact area on the backside of the bicycle and the paint transfer on the bumper, and that marks on the car's gravel pan were consistent with the theory that it struck the bicycle at a low speed and caused the bike to lodge beneath the car. On September 27, 1984, Atwood was charged with kidnapping. Because the investigation was still ongoing at that time, authorities did not know what additional evidence would be found or whether Vicky was still alive. This uncertainty changed on April 11, 1985, when the skull and bones of a child were found in the desert northwest of Tucson. Now, this is a very important piece of information that damns Atwood's case. Because the Eastern Orthodox sycophants that are praising this psychopath are saying, oh, well, they put the paint on the bumper and they framed Atwood. But excuse me, when they first found Atwood, when they first apprehended Atwood, they charged him with kidnapping, not murder. There was no body until 7 months later. Until about 7 months after Vicky's disappearance. So you're meaning to tell me that all these officers at the entire justice system in Arizona and Texas were plotting to frame this guy the whole time. But they were plotting to frame this guy even before a body was discovered. You would have to prove that various agencies within America's justice system all collectively conspired to plot, and that would be impossible to establish. And to sit there and say, well, they got him on kidnapping, and then before they found the skeletal remains, 7 months later, they were already plotting on damning this guy so that they can make him into a martyr. It's insane that people even believe this. It's insane. Initially, Atwood's memorandum submitted in support of his second state habeas petition argued that there was no pink paint. And this really damns this bastard. So Atwood originally said, oh, there was no paint on the bumper. I was framed. Under this theory, Atwood claimed that Agent Berwitz collected paint from the bumper of the car, but it was not pink. According to Atwood's theory at that time, the scrapings entered into the evidence collection log were replaced with later obtained pink paint scrapings, requiring evidence log entries to be altered. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Atwood later conceded that there was pink paint on his bumper at the time of his arrest, but he now claims it was not pink paint from Vicky's bicycle. So initially he said, well, there was no paint. But then he conceded, yeah, there was pink paint on the bumper. So which one is it? And this guy supposedly converted to Eastern Orthodoxy in the year 2000. But even after his supposed conversion, he was still claiming to this narrative of his that there was no pink paint on his bumper. But initially he said, but later on he conceded there was, but it was pink paint from somewhere else. So which one is it? There's a contradiction in his narrative, and for him claiming to be a Christian, he should tell the truth, but he didn't. Well, he should have told the truth. He's dead now, but he didn't. Why? Because he was dishonest. And this is an excerpt from an article from Tucson.com. And it talks about what the chief counsel for the Arizona Attorney General's office, Kent Catani, stated. And Kent Catani was making the case as to why Atwood's claims were just nonsense. So from the article, it says, Kent Catani, chief counsel for the Arizona Attorney General's office's Capital Litigation Division, doesn't believe Atwood is entitled to an evidentiary hearing. In court documents, Catani said numerous law enforcement officers from multiple agencies would have had to collectively decide to risk their careers to manufacture evidence. For all they knew, Vicky could have been alive and able to identify her kidnapper, he said, or they could have found her body at any moment and had all the forensic evidence they needed to track her killer. So in order for you to believe Atwood's narrative, you would have to prove that multiple law enforcement agencies all collectively work together. The FBI, the police, officials in Arizona, people in Texas, they all had to collectively work together in a giant grand conspiracy just to execute some lowlife named Frank Atwood. Makes no sense. So there's another argument that I want to deal with, and that is the Adiposer argument. So Adiposer is a substance that builds on a corpse when a corpse has been moist for a significant amount of time. And it's like this sort of fatty substance. And when they found the skeletal remains of Vicky, they found on her skull Adiposer. And so that meant that her body was moist for some time. And so Atwood's argument was that there was no way that I killed this girl because I would have had to have buried her in order for Adiposer to be there, because Adiposer grows, it builds up in a moist environment. And so Atwood said, well, she had to have been buried because we're in, Arizona. It's very, very dry, very hot. So there was no way for her body to be exposed in the desert and for Adiposer to build up. She had to have been buried, and I could not have buried her because the ground of the Arizona desert is very hard, and it would have taken me a long time, and there would be no way for me to bury her quick enough. And so this was Atwood's defense. And so the investigation dealt with this. And I want to read to you guys some excerpts from the court record. Prior to trial, Stanton Bloom, Atwood's attorney, reviewed the report written by Keene. Now remember, Keene was one of the experts that they brought in the beginning. This was Dr. Philip Keene, the Yavapai County medical examiner. And it says here that prior to trial, Stanton Bloom, Atwood's attorney, reviewed the report written by Keene, one of the two experts hired by Lamar Kauser, who was Atwood's initial attorney. He also hired 4 additional experts and questioned both of the state's experts about Adiposer. None of the numerous pathologists and anthropologists who examined the remains before trial indicated that burial was a precondition to Adiposer formation. So Atwood's defense said there was no way that I could have killed this girl because there was Adiposer. She would have had to have been buried in order for Adiposer to build up, because Adiposer thrives in a moist environment. But even the experts that Atwood's own attorney hired stated or gave no indication that Adiposer required a burial to form. And it says here, in an interview at the state medical examiner's office, the state's experts told Bloom and the prosecutor that there was no indication of burial. In drawing the conclusion that the victim's body must have been buried because of the existence of Adiposer, and that the skeletal remains must have been later exhumed by a human, Dr. Sperry's opinion fails to consider the known evidence, such as the weather conditions recorded at the weather station closest to the site where the remains were found, the absence of tool marks on the skeletal remains, and the absence of dirt embedded in the openings of the bones and skull. So the whole argument that says, well, there was Adiposer found on the skull, which meant that she had to have been buried, and Atwood could not have buried her because it would have taken too long, that argument just flies right out the window. And even the experts that Stanton Bloom hired, Stanton Bloom being the attorney of Atwood, stated that, or gave no indication that Adiposer required any burial. And the experts concluded that there was no indication of burial. So let's get into witnesses, because this is one of the big ones in regards to defending this monster. The mole witness claim. So there's a big, one of the biggest arguments in defense of this monster, in defense of Atwood, is that there was some lady at a mall who claimed to have seen a woman with Vicky not too long after her disappearance. This is from the court record. It says, one person claimed she saw Vicky with a woman at the Tucson Mall crying and asking to go home. Authorities considered it their best lead at the time, but Carlson being the mother of Vicky, ultimately testified in 1987 that it wasn't her daughter because Vicky wore Velcro shoes at the time of her disappearance, not shoes with laces, according to the Daily Star. And there is an excerpt from an article published in 1987 by the Arizona Daily Star. And it says here, Carlson, who earlier testified, and her full name is Debbie Carlson, by the way. Carlson, who earlier testified in the trial, said yesterday that Vicky Lynn wore sneakers that had Velcro fasteners and not shoelaces, as the mall clerk had testified. The state also was trying to show that the clerk, Connie Roger, this is the lady that claimed to have seen the girl, had described a photograph she had seen of Vicky Lynn rather than the girl. The state contends the clerk gave police a description of the girl only after she saw the photograph. So that argument flies out the window because the girl's own mother said, no, she didn't have Velcro shoes. No, she had Velcro shoes, not shoes with laces. So there's another testimony. This is from Sam Hall. Sam Hall was a coach at an elementary school, and he saw Frank Atwood in a car in front of the school making very weird movements and gestures. He was automatically suspicious for obvious reasons. He thought that he was looking at children. And Sam Hall took he wrote down the license plate number of Atwood's car. And it says here that Sam Hall, a teacher at a Tuscan elementary school, noticed a dark Z car with California license plates in an alley near the school. Hall described the driver as a man with a medium frame, shoulder-length hair, and a dark beard and mustache, a description that fit Atwood at the time, and noted that the man was making strange gestures and shaking his head. Because Hall was somewhat unnerved by the driver's appearance and behavior, he wrote down the car's license plate number. Then when he heard about Vicky's disappearance, he called up the police and said, hey, I saw a guy with suspicious behavior, displaying suspicious behaviors, and he gave the police the license plate number. The police tracked the car, and it was Atwood's vehicle. At around 3:30 p.m., an 8-year-old girl named Vicky Lynn Hoskinson left her Tuscan home on a pink bicycle to drop off a card at a nearby mailbox. Teenage boys in the neighborhood passed Vicky as she was riding her bicycle south toward the intersection of Root Lane and Posito Place, which was only a few hundred feet from the elementary school where Hall had observed the dark Z car with California license plates. The boys also passed a man with long, dark hair. So there was a group of boys, and they saw a man with long, dark hair, a mustache, and the beginnings of a beard in a dark Datsun Z car heading towards the same intersection. So we're having multiple witnesses here. They're giving corroborating information. On September 18th, Hall told the authorities about his observations, including the license plate number of the car. Authorities traced the car to Atwood, and agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation contacted his parents for information about his whereabouts. The FBI also obtained a warrant for Atwood's arrest on kidnapping charges. What's interesting is that it was also Atwood's own parents who contacted the authorities. So you would have to prove a conspiracy by multiple law enforcement agencies, the FBI, Sam Hall, the teacher at the elementary school, and the monster's own parents. So was the teacher at the elementary school part of the conspiracy? The group of boys, were they part of the conspiracy? Were the guy's own parents a part of the conspiracy when they reported their own son to the authorities? And why did they report their son to the authorities? Why? Well, there was a friend of Atwood who accompanied him by the last name of McDonald. Atwood was having a phone conversation with his parents because he was financially dependent on his parents. His car broke down. He called up his parents for money so he can get the car repaired. He was talking to his parents on the phone, and McDonald overheard him say to either his mother or his father or both on the phone, "Even if I did do it, you have to help me." Do what? McDonald also testified that Atwood told him that law enforcement was trying to stick something on him about a little girl. So he has a conversation with his parents. He tells his parents, "Even if I did it, you have to give me money." Then he tells his friend McDonald that law enforcement was trying to accuse me of about something regarding a little girl. Atwood's parents call the authorities after that phone conversation. That explains why his parents called the police, because they knew that their son was trouble. They knew that their son was a pedophile. They knew that their son was a violent person. Remember, he terrorized his family. He pulled the butcher knife on his own mother. And there's another weird piece of information that really proves how much of a sicko this Atwood guy was. This is from Tucson.com. It says, pretty soon sheriff's deputies learned several witnesses had seen a man in a dark-colored Datsun 280Z near Vicky's school. One little girl said the man had made an obscene gesture at her as he cruised by her house. So the guy drives to the school that's near her house, and he looks at a little girl and makes an obscene gesture at her. Another saw the driver of the car back into a telephone pole, and a teacher wrote down the car's license plate. He described getting goosebumps because the driver was making strange gestures, acting upset, and having trouble shifting gears. Other witnesses who observed the car a short time later said they saw a small child in the car. When deputies traced the plates, they learned the car was registered to Atwood, who was on parole in California for forcing an 8-year-old boy off a bicycle, pulling him onto his motorcycle, and forcing him to perform a sex act. So you have a group of boys saying they saw this guy in a car. You have the teacher at the school saying they saw this guy at a car. You have someone saying that they saw a child in the guy's car. It's right by Vicky's house. Vicky disappears around that same time, and it turns out that this guy was on parole for raping an 8-year-old boy. That's not a coincidence. That's not a coincidence. either he did it or you would have to prove that this is the grandest, biggest conspiracy ever done by law enforcement. So I want to give you guys the testimony heard by the jury. This goes back to the court record that I referenced earlier. The jury heard testimony that Atwood's car was seen at Vicky's school the day of her disappearance. Atwood was seen driving a Datsun in Vicky's neighborhood before she disappeared, and Atwood was seen leaving Vicky's neighborhood with a small child in his car. Testimony also placed Atwood in the vicinity of the site where Vicky's remains were found, and witnesses testified that they saw Atwood with a knife and with blood on his hands and clothes on the afternoon of Vicky's disappearance. The jury also heard evidence that Atwood had admitted he was attracted to children and had told Bernstein that the next time he picked up a child, he would make sure that the child did not talk. Here, and this is a quote from the Arizona Supreme Court from 1992, although we cannot know from the facts presented at trial exactly what happened to the victim when she was taken to the desert, we do know that one defendant, a convicted pedophile, was seen within yards of the girl literally seconds before she vanished. 2, witnesses identified defendant as the man they saw driving with a young child in his car. 3, defendant was seen later that afternoon with blood on his hands and clothing. And 4, defendant was also seen with cactus needles in his arms and legs. He went to the desert and he dropped this girl's corpse there. So the next subject I want to get into, the next title that I want to get into is dishonesty and manipulation. September 21st, 1984, the FBI transported Atwood to San Antonio, Texas. En route to San Antonio, Atwood changed his story, telling agents that he had returned to De Anza Park at 3:30 p.m. rather than 5 p.m. So initially he said, I returned to the park at 5. Then he changed it to 3:30. Liars always contradict themselves. On direct appeal, Atwood argued that his 1975 conviction could not be used as an aggravating circumstance under Section 13703, etc. If this guy was a Christian, why would he be saying, my prior crimes should not be included in this case? You raped children, multiple children. As a Christian, you should know that you are worthy of capital punishment. But instead, Atwood, being a manipulator, is trying to find loopholes to get himself out of capital punishment. Another demonstration as to how evil this person is or was. If he was truly repentant, he would be deeming himself worthy of death for molesting children. Atwood argues that had Bloom obtained, and Bloom was his lawyer, Atwood argues that had Bloom obtained professionals to look into Atwood's background and mental health, Bloom could have presented powerful mitigating evidence that Atwood suffered from a trauma-related mental impairment, such as post-traumatic stress disorder, which developed after Atwood was molested at the age of 14 by a 24-year-old. So Atwood said, my lawyer did not defend me well enough because he should have used mental illness. He should have used my mental illness. He should have used me being molested as a child for my defense to show that I am a traumatized man and it's not truly, it wasn't truly within my control what I did. I lost agency because of trauma, my mental health, etc., etc. My attorney should have used my mental illness as a defense. But here's the problem. And it's amazing that a Christian would be using this sort of argumentation. Somebody who converted to Christianity would be using this. Because if you, it's obvious that you're trying to find loopholes. But I'm going to show you guys why this guy was being manipulative. Finally, Bloom testified that Atwood was opposed to a mental impairment theory. Atwood did not want Bloom to bring in anything about his mental problems or anything about his sexual past, and indicated that he was not going to cooperate. So initially, Atwood tells his lawyer, don't bring up anything about mental illness. And then after the case, he says, my lawyer did not bring up anything about mental illness. He did not defend me adequately enough. Do you see the contradiction? Do you see the dishonesty and the manipulation? The Atascadero records showed that multiple social workers, psychiatrists, and psychologists had interviewed Atwood or considered his case, and none of these professionals indicated that Atwood had any significant mental impairment or disease. So he said, my lawyer should have said that I'm mentally ill. But all of the social workers, psychiatrists, and psychologists who interviewed this bastard at the Atascadero hospital indicated that Atwood had no significant mental impairment or disease. According to Stanton Bloom, Atwood's own attorney, Atwood did not take being molested by the 24-year-old very seriously. He had told Bernstein that he enjoyed the experience, that he did not appear traumatized by it. So he's trying to put the blame on his lawyer when his own lawyer said that Atwood was not bothered by being molested. He was not bothered about it. And this guy was a Christian? The 4-day evidentiary hearing also included the testimony of mental health professionals who evaluated Atwood for purposes of the hearing. Atwood presented testimony from Dr. Donna Schwartzwatz, a psychiatrist who evaluated Atwood in October of 2012. So remember, this guy converted in 2000. So this is 12 years later. At the evidentiary hearing, Schwartzwatz testified that Atwood currently exhibited many of the symptoms of PTSD, but that she could not determine whether Atwood developed PTSD when he was molested at the age of 14 or in response to other adverse events, such as his experiences in prison. Schwartzwatz conceded that the Atascadero records did not report that Atwood had been traumatized. She also conceded that the records documented a pattern of behavior consistent with antisocial personality disorder and stated, quote, it's very fair to say a lot of Atwood's actions once he was confined were sociopathic. They were to get something he wanted. They were to manipulate. So the mental health professional that Atwood's own lawyer hired admitted that Atwood was a manipulator, that Atwood was a manipulative person, that he was simply saying things so he could get what he wanted, which was to escape capital punishment. And this was in 2012. His evaluation was done. And his conversion was in 2000. So in 2000, he finds the Lord, and then in 2012, the psychiatrist or the mental health expert that's hired to defend him says this guy's a manipulator. He was a liar, a manipulator, and he manipulated all of these Orthodox Christians online. He succeeded in manipulating all of these Eastern Orthodox Christians. Schwartzwatz also testified that Atwood, quote, technically meets the criteria for pedophilia. In 2012, she concluded this. 12 years later, after his conversion, supposed conversion, the mental health professional hired to defend him declares that Atwood was a pedophile, which meant that he never changed. The state presented expert testimony from Dr. Aaron Nelson, a psychologist who conducted a mental health evaluation of Atwood in June of 2013. Nelson testified that she had diagnosed Atwood with substance abuse disorder, pedophilic disorder, and antisocial personality disorder. So the lawyer, the mental health professional who was hired by Atwood's own attorney said that this guy's a pedophile and he's a manipulator. And the mental health professional hired by the state said the same damn thing, which means that this guy deserved it. He was a monster. He was a criminal. He was a liar. He was a manipulator. You find contradictions in his arguments. You find outright manipulative behavior in this guy. And this guy was so manipulative, he succeeded in manipulating hundreds of thousands of people on the internet. Nelson concluded that a large amount of the evidence indicated that Atwood may have developed PTSD post-incarceration, pointing out that the Atascadero records contained no discussion of trauma and that Atwood bragged about his ability to manipulate psychologists, and he manipulated a whole crowd of Eastern Orthodox Christians. I don't know what else to say. I've talked long enough in this video. But I wanted to show you guys that when someone in the United States is deemed worthy of capital punishment, before we just jump to conclusions based on our own biases, we have to look at the court records. We have to look at the evidence. We have to look at all of the corroborating information. We have to look at the testimonies. We have to look at the contradictions. We have to look at all of these things, the contradictions of the defense. We have to look at all of these things before we allow ourselves to be manipulated by a criminal. And I want to finish this video with a verse from the Bible, Ecclesiastes 8:11. Because the sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. And that's it. That's my presentation. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.